Mike, let's recap the draft. All right, Saints will go pick by pick in what they did and start at the top. You said they'd go interior line. They did. What do you think of the pick with Ruiz at 24?
You know, he's a guy that I think, Matt, eventually, he is going to be the starting center for the Saints. What I can't tell you about today is with the uncertainty of training camp and what you're going to do with that and how much time, would you give Drew Brees a new center 2 straight years? So I think he probably ends up starting outside at guard at first. But then he's going to be your starting center, and they're going to kick Eric McCoy out to the guard position. So I'll get that right off the bat. But I don't know that happens right away because of the lack of playing time or practice time, and it's the timing between the lineman and the center. Big physical guy, I think a much better pass blocker than a run blocker. That's why I think he's best suited to play the center position. Doesn't get a big push as a run blocker. He's solid there, but he's not known as that road grader like McCoy is. But, man, he's a good technician, knows how to use his arms and hands well, smart young man, super smart. Made all the calls for Michigan up front. I had him as a dead heat with Lloyd Cushenberry as a top center because I think that's where both of them are going to start. It's going to be at center eventually for Ruiz. So I think that looking at what and hearing what Sean has talked about for so long now, since the season ended, he was not happy with the weight issue of Larry Wolford. Larry came in overweight last year, 20, 25 pounds, maybe even a little bit more. And, you're paying him $9-10 million a year, and you're going to come in that overweight. That's not going to go over well. And it's his money year. I think if you were going to deal him, you probably would have got your best price around draft time. All I know is if Larry Wolford comes in shape to the Saints training camp, and I don't know that, but if he does, there ain't nobody going to beat him out. No one on this roster. I mean, he's a Pro Bowl caliber guard if he comes in shape. The problem was he wasn't that way last year, and that irritated Sean. And, again, it's more and more, and I'm sort of repeating myself with this because I think the draft sort of indicated it. When you look at edge rushers, how many of those guys went in round 1? Chase Young and Caleb, right?
Is that it?
Okay, and the list ends, boys. But I can find that interior player. So what you see more and more, it's being done at the college level. It's being done in the pro level. It's to try to get all that pressure up the middle and try to force that quarterback from not being able to step up in the pocket, to take that 1 or 2 step up and make the throw. Because if you can get him to stop doing that, one, you blow up the launch pad where he wants to throw, and you get him on the move. You know what that does? Throws the timing off as a receiver. Completely off.
Yeah.
And so that's why the Saints and Sean has long had this vision of it that, you can see more and more now that pressure is coming from a linebacker or a delayed blitz with the safety and everything else. You got to keep your pocket clean. I don't care if it's Drew Brees, it's Taysom Hill, it's Jameis Winston, whatever. You got to keep that inside pocket clean for your quarterback to be able to take that 1 or 2 step up and make the throw. So it's imperative. And the Saints have spent money on guards in the past. Jari Evans. They made Carl Nix, and Carl's actually one who told me they made him an offer that he would have been the highest paid lineman in NFL history. Here's the issue. The Bucs made him even better offer. So he went to Tampa. They spent it on Ben Grubbs. Now, look what they've done with Andrus Peat. I'm telling you, that's part of Sean's thinking, understanding how this game is subtly changing, and it's not so much always off the edge. It's in the middle. That's why the Ruiz pick makes a lot of sense in what they're doing. And you know what? For 2020, if I'm all chips in, am I better with a in-shape Larry Wolford? Yes. I don't have to deal him off unless I get a great deal. And something's going to happen that another team may need a guard, a rent guard, similar to what we saw with Emmanuel Sanders in Denver. Okay, a team come that trade deadline, San Francisco needed that receiver, and they were willing to give you up multiple picks for him. You only got him for a year. Then he becomes a free agent. All I can tell you is if Wolford's in shape, no one beats him out at guard. No one. No one's going to beat him out. But I can't tell you he wasn't in shape last year. So that's why the Ruiz pick makes all the sense in the world to have him, and he is eventually going to be your starting center, and they're going to move Eric McCoy out to the guard position.
Mike, a lot of people thought they'd go linebacker round 1. They didn't, but they get the linebacker in round 3 with Zack Baun, and then they traded back in round 3 to get Trautman, the tight end from Dayton. So 2 picks on day 2 there in round 3. What do you make of what the Saints did?
Man, I had Baun as a late first-round pick. I think a little bit of it for me was supply and demand. That where am I going to find that guy? And he was very productive at Wisconsin. I watched a lot of Wisconsin football last year, and I saw his development as a player. Not only he was terrific as an edge guy. I mean, he had the ability to cut that edge hard, get a lot of pressure. He was a good sack guy. You could see his closing speed to the quarterback. Also, he could run the field very well. Now, in the coverage part of the game, he did some of that, but it was short, what I call short coverage. They weren't asking him to drop deep downfield. A lot of it was short coverage. So I felt this way. On third down, initially, I don't have to take him off the field. Not so much for coverage. Go get the quarterback. Name of the game is to go get him. And that's what he can do very well. You look at his athletic background, and it's almost as though the Saints have a little bit of a blueprint on what they're looking for. You go back and dig into his background, which is in my book. He's a former quarterback. He did play some linebacker in high school, but he was a quarterback and a highly accomplished quarterback. He ran the 100-meter dash, 400-meter relays. He went to the state meet in Wisconsin. Man, listen, I don't give a damn what state you're in. You fast when you're into the state meets for that. You one fast dude, basketball player, soccer player. Okay, so he was a really good all-around athlete, got redshirted year 1, hurt his foot afterwards. But last 2 years, he's really played well. And he's a guy that can give you that edge pressure. I think he's going to be the Sam linebacker for the Saints. He's going to take over for A.J. Klein. I think that's why they envision that's eventually going to be his spot. But his pass rush skills are very good, and that's why I thought he'd be a late first, early second-round pick. It was reasoning why the Saints were trying to move back up into round 2 to get him. They just could not come up with a deal, and then you get him in round 3. That's value across the board when you can get him in the 3rd round. He's a very motivated young man. The Wisconsin coaches rave about his work ethic and how hard he's worked at his game, and the transition from being an offensive player at quarterback to playing linebacker. You know, that's not like a switch that you flip on and on like a light. You got to learn how to play that position. I'm interested to see how well he learns the coverage part of the game, because if I see him out there, I'm going to attack that area. I'm going to go after him. I want to see how well he can cover NFL players. On the other hand, on third down, an obvious pass situation, I want him coming off the edge to rush the quarterback, because he can do that really, really well. And what you see with him is his closing speed to the quarterback. He takes good angles. He takes that angle almost, he can cut it and then find that little nook to get in there to get after the quarterback. I love that pick in round 3 for the Saints and Zack Baun.
All right, Mike, let's get back into round 3. The Saints trade back in, trading the rest of their – shocker, right? The Saints traded up again. They trade the rest of their draft to get Adam Trautman, the tight end, out of Dayton. What did they get here in Trautman?
He was my number 2 rated tight end in this draft class. I saw him play a few games at Dayton, and I watched the film on him once. Jim Nagy invited him to the Senior Bowl. I wanted to get a good look before going to Mobile to watch him. And he was nervous day one. Come on, everybody would be. You know, you're playing at a small school at Dayton. All of a sudden now you got everybody in the pro football world watching you practice. This ain't a game, it's practice. But the practice is really counted. I thought he was a little nervous in the first day, but then afterwards he was fine. And he was winning the battles. He is a big man receiver, 6'4" plus in the 255 range. He doesn't have great speed. He's got good speed. But, man, he knows how to find those open creases downfield and get open. They used him at Dayton a lot like a big basketball forward. A lot of plays for him was he'd go downfield and turn around in short yardage area, and then he'd box everybody out, make the catch. Do the same thing in the end zone. That's why he had, I think it's either 31 or 33 touchdown catches. They did a lot of that with him. Guess what? The Saints do the exact same thing.
Right.
They do the exact same thing with their tight ends. They use a lot of that box out stuff. So, and better than most of the tight ends in this draft class, he's a good inline blocker. I took this away from watching him in Mobile is how physical he was at the point of attack. That, man, he's no let up there. Now, he's going to need a little bit of work technically as far as run blocking is concerned, and also running routes because it's different, certainly, than playing at Dayton. But he is awfully gifted, tremendously driven, and Zach Strief and I were talking about this because his former coach coached him at Dayton, and now he's with the Raiders, and his comment is, you can't wear him out. No matter what you tell him to do, if you tell him run 20-yard sprints and back, he'll do 25. If he's in the weight room, give me 10 of these or 15 of these, he's going to do 18 to 20. No matter what you give him, he wants to do more. He's a very driven young man, real sharp guy, going to be an electrical engineer. So I sort of know, you're not cutting fruit anywhere to do that. I mean, you understand. You got to be a pretty sharp guy. It's not like learning how to use a knife. He gets it real good. And so he's a quick pickup guy. And Matt, so I'll bring it up. All three of them. What Sean has always talked about, and it's something I told you a couple weeks ago. When I finish up my board, I go back and give a guy a higher grade on intelligence. And again, he doesn't have to be a brain surgeon, and he doesn't have to plead my case in front of the Supreme Court. But he's got to be able to be smart and pick this up. And with I think a limited training camp, if you're going to have production from these rookies, you better get smart ones. And what does Ruiz and Baun and Trautman, they all get high marks for? Their intelligence. They pick it up. They understand it. And so I like to pick a Trautman. I think he's a guy that's going to end up being a really good fit player in this offense and eventually be the starter for them at tight end. He gets it, and he's got good timing skills with the ball in flight. When you watch him play, it's not all of this is feet are on the ground. Listen, the quarterback for Dayton, it's not like he's starting, in the SEC or in the Big 12. He was sailing a lot of those throws, and so he was having to get up to make those catches. And he's got really good eye-hand coordination, ability to get up in the air to make a catch. And, yeah, he ran a 4.8 40-yard dash. Okay. How many times do I have that tight end running 40 yards downfield unless it's a touchdown?
True.
But you look at how quick he is in that 20, 25-yard area. He's awfully fast. And that's where I need him to be in that particular category. He's a really good football player and a very driven young man. I like all those qualities in Trautman and Baun, Ruiz.
Mike, last one. What in the world are they doing with trading back in to get Tommy Stevens?
Okay, initially my thing was you got to be kidding, because I did see Tommy Stevens throw the football. And my thing is, hey, come on. So, man, listen, I had an Ole Miss guy sitting right next to me in Deuce, and he was like, they can't be picking him at quarterback. Because we both saw it, and he came to Manning, and he was an impressive-looking young man, a big guy. Actually, Martin False with HTV has my interview with him. I actually caught him on an interview, and, he talked about that, he could really throw the ball deep downfield. He's just not accurate. I mean, he's all over the board. And you can understand why he was a backup at Penn State to McSorley. who was a really good player there. I mean, he was a really good player. And, we were just sort of thinking about it. Why would you use a seventh-round pick or a sixth-round pick to get back in round 7 to get Tommy? And then it started to settle with me because he explained to me his background, that he was an all-state safety, and that I think he told me like 4 or 5 years old, his dad was training him to be a defensive back. And so he had always played defensive back up until his junior season, and then there's an injury. And his coach says, Stevens, we're putting you at quarterback. He was like, okay, I've always played defense. And so he got to be pretty good at it, and enough that he got a scholarship to go to Penn State. Now, listen, that's not the easiest thing in the world to do, to go from Indiana and go to Penn State. You got to have some skills there. He goes there, he's entrenched as the starter. So what did they do with him there? If you watched it, they played him as a flex tight end, played him at wide receiver. They had games where they used him at running back. So once we started talking about it, we could see what was in the back of Sean's mind. He's looking at him to be a similar person to Taysom Hill. Taysom didn't have a defensive background with him. He had always been a quarterback. He had never played on the defensive side of football. But Tommy has. And so when we got him on right after he got selected, he told us the story about he was basically begging the coaches at Penn State and Mississippi State to play defense. And they are on special teams. And they said, no, you're not playing on special teams. And the way Trace was playing at quarterback, man, he was taking a lot of hits. So I get that he might be putting the lineup pretty quickly at quarterback. And then he tells us the story. He's up to 255 pounds. He had never ran under a 4.5 40-yard dash. He ran a 4.49 40-yard dash at 255. And Sean Payton asked him to do tape in running routes. And so he did that. He had experience at receiver. Taysom didn't have experience at receiver until he got to the Saints. He did it in the pre-draft part of it, but he never was part of it. He was always a quarterback. So you can sort of see what's in the back of Sean's mind. He's got the thinking that Stevens one day could be that Taysom Hill type player. And he is one thing I can tell you, he's a big dude. I mean, he's pretty close to 6'5", because him and Justin Herbert were sitting down next to one another. And basically, when they stood up, there wasn't much difference between the two of them. And Herbert's legit 6'5", and I'm not sure he's not a little bit more than that. And they were both pretty much the same size. Now, he wasn't 255 or 245 pounds as he is today. Highly erratic as a passer, though. I mean, he's all over the board. He was like that in Manning with nobody, pressuring him. He was throwing the football high, low, all over the board. So you know that's not why they're bringing him in.
Yeah.
But they're bringing him in, like Taysom, to play that role. And the fact that, Matt, that he's had experience playing wide receiver and playing on defense, you can see where the wheels are clicking with Sean here. And they wanted to beat out the Panthers because, you know what, Joe Brady's ties with Moorhead, he was going to sign him. And basically, Stevens told the Saints, hey, listen, if I'm a free agent, I'm not going to sign with you. I'm going somewhere else. Well, he was going to sign with Carolina because of his ties with Joe Brady and Moorhead, who knew one another well, and he was on that staff at one time. So that connected dots. Sean said, well, forget about that. We'll just trade and get you, and then, we ain't got to worry about dealing with the free agent part of it. It's an interesting pick. And in talking to Taysom 2 days ago, I mentioned to him, man, look where you are today. He was a guy that was, most people thought, at best, a backup quarterback in the NFL. He gets cut with the Packers after going undrafted. The Saints pick you up. They love the athleticism, and all of a sudden now everybody's trying to take credit for it, but it's the old Pops himself, who was the former special teams coach for the Saints. It was him that said, let him play special teams. And look what that's opened up. First words out of Doug Peterson's mouth when he picked Jalen Hurts, he's going to play the Taysom Hill role.
Interesting.
How about that?
Yeah.
After all of that, and now people are going to come out and they're going to compare themselves to him. And so I think Stevens he's a developmental player. I think he's going to spend this season on a developmental squad.
I don't know how we're possibly going to fit in comments on 20 different guys, so let's try to do the best we can here. 14 guys picked from LSU, 6 signed as undrafted free agents. Any of the selections or locations where these guys went, did any of those surprise you?
Man, I can't say a surprise. I'm surprised Fulton went in round 2. I did know the Titans liked him, and that's why I had him going to the Titans in round 1. He went to him in round 2. I do know the GM a little bit. He's a former Nicholls State linebacker coach. So I knew he had a lot of interest in Kristian, but I didn't think he'd fall into the second round. And I think that's a great pickup for him, too, because I think he comes in pretty quickly and makes an impact there. But none of the guys, now you understand a little bit about Thad because of basically I think teams were looking at him as a one-year guy, concerned about the injuries, the foot, the Jones fracture he had. I thought he would get selected, to be honest with you. I thought he'd be a pick, that somebody was going to turn the key on that, but it just didn't happen. So I think that was the other part of it, that I think for me, he would have been a guy, man, in round 7, I got to take a chance on, just because of his production in that 1 year. And it's a nice fit out in Washington for him. If you look at Ron Rivera, he is a guy that he sort of, even though he's a defensive coach, he has put a lot of emphasis on trying to get the ball to the tight end. If you look at the success Greg Olsen had there, he's put a lot of emphasis offensively toward his staff to make sure that the tight end is heavily involved in the offense. So that's a nice fit for him.
What about Jefferson sliding down at 22 to Minnesota? I didn't think he'd get past Philly at 21, especially considering the number of receivers that went off the board ahead of him. Yeah,
that's a small surprise because he went in the area sort of where you thought he would go, 18 to 22 in that spot. The opening's there, no digs. So now you get to play that particular spot that Stephon had played. So it's a nice fit for him. He's a bigger receiver than what Diggs is. One thing with Mike Zimmer, he likes a bigger receiver, similar to Sean. He rathers the bigger receiver than the smaller one. But I think it's a good fit for him. You put him in that slot, and then Thielen does what he does. He gets open downfield. One of the things with Minnesota, and doing a lot of prep work for them when they played the Saints in the playoff game, is how much of the time they use 2 tight ends. Because, a lot of times Rudolph and Irv Smith Jr. on the field at the same time. So here's your deal. Pick who you want to double cover. You got Jefferson, you got Thielen, you got Irv Smith Jr., you got Kyle Rudolph. No excuses for Cousins. Come
right.
on. If you upright, you got to get the ball. Somebody's going to be open downfield. And Dalvin Cook's a really good receiver coming out of the backfield. The other thing about with the Vikings, with so many picks, it was funny. We got to meet with a couple of their brass before the Saints game, and they all mentioned that this draft was important to them because they felt they had gotten a little bit old and that they needed to add a lot of depth youth-wise to the lineup. And look how many draft choices they had. I mean, they sort of loaded up there. And you can start to see when a team, I think, makes that decision internally that, we got to make a move here. And we may have to take maybe a half a step back and go with the younger players. You see what the Vikings have done in the offseason. They deal off Diggs. They cut loose Everson Griffin. You start to see some of the maneuvers that they talked about in January actually happened on draft day.
Mike, what about Grant Delpit sliding it around 2 to Cleveland?
That didn't surprise me. I know we've talked about it before. I still think he's a first-round pick talent, but because of the injuries and you couldn't work out. I mean, again, it's nothing that he did wrong. He could have easily done what a lot of players have done. You know what? I get hurt. I ain't playing. I made a business decision. They had one at LSU a few years back with an ankle. I ain't playing no more.
Yep.
Man, I make a business decision. Man, my ankle's hurt. I can't play anymore. I'm out. Okay, and I get it because that's your career. You got to make that decision. He decided to try to play, and he certainly wasn't his best, and it showed up. That's on tape. And I've seen some things. It's like they've never seen Grant Delpit before. Never. But again, I think it's a great value pick for the Browns to get him in round 2. If he's healthy, he is a tremendous football player. But him going in round 2 was not a surprise to me. I talked to enough people in the league that I had a feeling where my first thoughts were about him was going to happen, that he would slide into the second round. Just uncertainty. And I think guys with injuries, we've seen it. You see it happen with Moss. You saw it happen with Delpit. You saw it happen with other guys that had some injuries. They sort of took a little tumble. I thought they were much more conservative in round 1 than we've seen in years past. That's what made the round 2, I think, much more interesting. And I do think it also had an effect on Zack Baun.
Interesting.
And Zack brought it up about the foot injury that a lot of people, it wasn't about no diluted sample. It was all about there were concerns about the foot that they had some concerns about, and they didn't have their doctors to take that second look like you normally would have. That slid him into the third round.
Mike, what about the 3 offensive linemen with 2 going in round 3, Cushenberry and Damian Lewis, and, of course, Sadiq heading out to Washington?
Man, listen, I think the world of Lloyd. I think the Broncos got themselves one hell of a center in Lloyd Cushenberry. I think he's a tremendous player, and he'll be a leader there. It's a tough position to come in and say, I'm the guy. I'm the starter at center. You got to know what you're doing on every snap. And, again, the limited amount of training camp, which I think there is some reality in that has changed now. You're not in for the OTAs and the summer camps and all this stuff. You can do that on the internet. No, but come on. It's not like you working with the team together. I think it's going to hurt the linemen more than anything. Sadiq, I agree with Coach O. Had he decided to come back, he could have potentially been a first-round pick guy. But, I think the off-the-field issues put him in that third round. It's a good spot. Trent Williams is gone, so you got that opportunity there to at least compete for that position there. And if he's focused and everything is right, mentally to get yourself ready to play in the NFL, because this is a business. You're not on scholarship anymore. And so you got to have the right mindset. All former players say the same thing. Physically, you can do it. It's the mental part. You got to be able to understand it and not kind of have a hiccup or two. Sadiq is a good football player, and so that's a nice spot for him with Trent Williams being dealt off, and it gives him an opportunity to compete. Damian Lewis, just a big road grader. You think about what Seattle wants to do. They want to run the ball. They just have been terrible in picking linemen to do that. You knew what he does best. I mean, he's a terrific run blocker. He's gotten better as a pass protector. And I do know that he got good intel. I think Ed would be the first one to tell you, his closest friend in the coaching ranks is Pete Carroll.
Sure.
And so, that made a lot of sense in that part where he goes there, and I think he competes for a starting spot this year. You think about a guy with 0 offers coming out of high school. 0. He goes to junior college, and he started every game for LSU that he was available to start. It's not a lot of guys that can say they did that. There ain't many. And so he was a very good football player, very underrated, but his run blocking skills fits what Pete likes in that offensive lineman. He wants that big physical guy. And they want to try to run the ball more to protect Russell Wilson.
On email from Shane, who says, ask Mike, were the Saints going to draft Kenneth Murray had the Chargers not traded in front of them?
I think the Chargers thought that way.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, when it came down to that pick, that was the thought in my mind that it would be Murray. He fit more what the Saints look at linebacker. He's a bigger, more physical player than Patrick. Even though I still, thought that Queen could be the pick. I think the Chargers thought that way. That's no way that they make that move if they thought you were going for the center guard.
Right.
Okay, so they made that pick thinking in the back of their mind that the Saints would go with Murray. I couldn't tell you that only because I'm not in between the ears of Sean Payton. But I do know one thing. When you make a move like that, I think you know that something might be up. And so I think the Chargers really thought that. That's why they made the trade.
Here's one from Mark Shelton on Twitter. It said, ask Mike, how much time did Sean Payton spend scouting Jameis Winston before he was drafted in 2015?
He had the workout with him, spent a lot of time on it. Now, again, you got to understand Sean. He knew who had the first pick in the draft, and he was going to have to play him twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
So he spent a lot of time with Jameis because he was going to have to play. And you got to be careful with Sean because he's like Peyton Manning. You tell him something, he's going to use it against you. And that's just the way he is. Hey, that's part of the game. But he spent a lot of time with Jameis and was part of the workout for Winston leading up into the draft. And I remember there was stories all over, the Saints are going to trade up to get Jameis Winston, all this and that. No, it's what Sean does every year. Every top quarterback, he's there.
True.
If he thinks he's going to have to play him, he is there. And especially with the Bucs, knowing you're going to have to play him twice a year. So he did a long scouting report on Jameis Winston.
We are getting a lot of questions about Jameis, as you might expect. This one says, this is from Rinaldi, who said, ask Mike, you've been saying the future quarterback is not on the roster yet. After the Winston signing, do you still feel that way?
Well, I ain't seen him play yet, but I will say this. There's a reason you went out and get him. If you were totally convinced Taysom Hill is your guy, why did you sign Winston? That's my case. And I thought that way a couple of weeks back, that they were going to find a veteran quarterback to come in here. Sean and I get it. You got to say sometimes what you got to say. And maybe he does believe that Taysom could be that guy. But there's a reason you went out and get Winston. There's a reason why you went out and get him. He has started in this league. If Drew goes down game 7 and he's got to miss 3 or 4 games last year, he's my quarterback of the future. Who walked in? Teddy Bridgewater.
Yep.
Okay? Are you think anything's going to be different this year?
Nope.
He's going to go with Winston.
I'm 100% with you. I've been saying.
Man, listen, I took a lot of heat for that.
I need someone else. I need them to hear someone else's voice because I've been screaming that for a month now, Mike. I mean, I'm like, I was yelling about Jameis a month ago. So you and I talked about it on the show. So I'm with you.
And listen, there's another edge to this. Okay, if this was Johnny Manziel, you wouldn't hear as much squawking about it. There's another side to this story, so to speak. Oh, man, Jameis Winston, he's a punk. He did this, he did that. Now, a lot of people do stupid things when they're young. Let me dig into your background, okay? Let me dig into your background and see how much you want to kind of blurt out to me about what's happened. Or, okay, you do dumb things when you're young. You don't do them when you get older in that spot. Hopefully he's matured. And I think being in that room with Sean and Drew is going to help. But I've always felt this about Jameis, that you can get him a little bit better, but he's always going to be a high-reward, high-risk type passer because he thinks he can put a ball anywhere on the field. It has nothing to do with scheme and coaching and everything else. I think Sean and Drew is a big help to him, huge help to him in his development overall. But he's always going to have that streak in him to throw the football. He's always going to be that type passer. But, he's put up some numbers here, and I have a column ready. I got to talk to Gay Culverhouse, who was in Tampa. In fact, she was part of the ownership there with her dad. And some similarities between him and Vinny Testaverde. And how, Vinny played in this league forever. But he was always a guy that threw almost as many touchdowns as he did interceptions. It was pretty close almost every year. I think that's just something sort of built into him as a player that I think I can get that ball anywhere on the field. Now you can get that C student maybe to be the B student. Yeah, I don't know about being that A guy.
He's Mike Detillier. We've got, Mike, 2 more minutes. Let's see how many we can get to here. Ask Mike. He's asking about having Cushenberry ranked as high as Ruiz. Could that have been a 3rd round or later pick for New Orleans? Why go for the interior linemen as early as they did?
I think that they felt that those interior linemen were going to come off the board much quicker. Much quicker than what I thought. I'm honest with you. I thought Cushenberry would have been long gone by the midway into the 2nd round, and same thing with Ruiz. Just a miscalculation. But Sean felt differently. Yeah. He wanted that interior player. And so, listen, it wasn't just a want. It was a need when you look at it. You can say, well, I can get him a little bit later. That might not have happened. And the way the draft was going, and see Robert Hunt. Now, he got picked higher than I thought he would get picked. I had him as a mid to late 2nd. He got picked early in round 2.
Yep.
So you can see where the thinking now of NFL teams are starting to change when it comes down to interior linemen, and it's also got me starting to change too.
Mike, we got about a minute left. Ask Mike, do you think the Saints win 12 games?
Man, with that schedule, that'll be tough. I would have said 11.
Let's see, one more. Ask Mike, should the Saints have waited on Andy Dalton to get released?
You're going to have to pay a lot more for Andy. And Andy's going to be limited, too. I wouldn't be surprised to see Andy go to Las Vegas.
Interesting. Out there with Gruden.
Gruden likes to collect quarterbacks.
We've known that for a lot of years. He's Mike Detillier, SaintsReport.com, MikeDetillier.com, part of the Saints News Network over at SI.com. He's with us every Thursday here on AFR Talking Some Football. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Mike Detillier. Mike, you the man. We appreciate you as always. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, brother. Take care.